December 1880, Wyoming Territory. The snow had stopped pretending to be gentle a long time ago. It came in waves now, a howling white fury that erased the horizon, swallowing up trees and tracks and reason. Lydia Hartwell pressed lower over the saddle, her breath sharp in her throat, every gust threatening to shove her from her horse. Her cloak had turned stiff with ice, and her hands, she couldn't feel them anymore. Not truly. They had warned her. Back in Cheyenne, the old man at the telegraph station had shaken his head when she'd asked about Whisper Ridge. "That trail ain't forgiving this time of year," he'd said. "Nothing out there but snow and bones." But she'd come anyway, because her sister was missing. Because someone had to look. Iris always chasing freedom, like it was something she could lasso and tame. Lydia could still hear her laughter, see her scrawl in the last letter. "They say there's work up north. Real money. Don't worry, Lyd. I'll write again soon." But soon never came. Lydia tugged at the reins, urging her gelding forward, but the poor beast stumbled, legs trembling. He whinnied a broken sound and collapsed onto his side in the deepening snow. "No!" she gasped, falling with him. The ground bit into her knees, cold seeping through wool and flesh to marrow. She tried to stand. Her limbs rebelled. Wind screamed over the ridge. This is how people die out here, she thought. Not from violence, not even from fear. Just from being alone too long and too much cold. She sank to her side cheek, pressing against the snow. The white world blurred and dimmed. Then a crunch. Footsteps. Lydia couldn't lift her head, but she sensed a presence. Heavy boots. A figure crouched beside her. Rough hands, warm through layers, slipped beneath her shoulders. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. A deep voice. Calm, steady. Almost annoyed. "You're lucky I found you. Out here the snow doesn't lie. It buries secrets." She woke to warmth, but not comfort. Firelight flickered dimly across wooden beams. The walls were close, the ceiling low, and the scent of smoke and something metallic like urine or blood hung in the air. She lay beneath a heavy quilt, her body sore but thawing. Her lips cracked as she licked them, throat dry. Across the small room, a man sat with his back to her. He was sharpening a knife. The rasp of stone on steel sent a chill through her that the fire couldn't chase away. She swallowed. "Where am I?" He didn't look up, just said, "My cabin." His voice was the same as before, gravelly, worn. A voice shaped by silence more than speech. Lydia pushed herself up slowly. Her cloak was gone. Someone had wrapped her in flannel and fur. Her satchel rested nearby. Her boots steamed beside the fire. The man stood. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, and broad through the chest and shoulders. Dark hair longer than fashion allowed back east. A beard flecked with snowmelt. He turned just enough for her to see his face, lined, weathered. Maybe 30, maybe older. "I found you near the pass," he said. "Half buried, horse dead. You were an hour from freezing." "Thank you." He nodded once, then returned to his task. She watched him work. His hands were steady, his movements economical. No wasted energy. The sort of man who'd long ago made peace with being alone. The wind moaned through the gaps in the wooden walls. The knife hissed again against the stone. "Do you live here alone?" she asked, careful. "Yeah." "Do you see many travelers?" "Not this time of year." The fire popped. Somewhere outside, a tree groaned beneath the weight of snow. Lydia's gaze wandered the cabin. It was sparse, functional, but not crude. A cot, a table with tools, shelves of jars and tins. But something snagged at her attention, a scarf, delicate and clearly feminine, tucked beneath a lantern, embroidered. She blinked. No, not a scarf. A handkerchief. She leaned forward. Her eyes adjusted. Letters stitched in blue thread. I.H. Her breath caught. Sawyer turned to look at her finally. His gaze settled on hers. not hostile, but not open either. "You're looking for someone," he said. Not a question. Lydia's mouth was dry again. She nodded. He crossed the room slow and sure, and handed her a tin cup. Water cold but keen. She took it with shaking hands. "My sister, Iris Hartwell. She left Boston in September. Said she was coming out here to find work. The last letter she sent mentioned Whisper Ridge. Then nothing." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That name doesn't belong here anymore." "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the fireplace, used the knife to adjust a log. Lydia stared at the handkerchief again. She wanted to ask, wanted to demand. But something in his posture, tense alert, made her hesitate. She said instead, "You knew her." Sawyer didn't turn around. But his voice came low and bitter. "She came here, but she didn't belong here." A silence thick as snowfall settled between them. Then he turned, met her eyes. "You need to rest. I need answers. Answers won't keep you warm." He turned back to his work. Lydia watched him, muscles taut. She felt it then, that strange awareness. A pull, dangerous and magnetic. When she rose to set the cup down, her fingers brushed his. He stiffened, barely a flinch, but enough. She glanced up. His expression had changed. Less guarded. More human. Troubled. And something else, fleeting, raw. Before either could speak, he turned away, sharply placing the knife down, as if it suddenly weighed too much. "Be careful, Miss Hartwell," he murmured, voice almost lost beneath the wind pressing at the walls. "Not everything out here is as frozen as it looks." Lydia didn't answer. But she didn't look away either. The fire snapped. The wind screamed. And somewhere beneath the floorboards of this quiet little cabin, secrets lay sleeping in the snow. If this story pulled you in, even just a little, hit subscribe and stay with us. There's more snow to cross, more truths to uncover, and the heart of the mountain is only beginning to speak. Lydia didn't sleep much that night. The fire dimmed by slow degrees, shadows stretching and shrinking like breathing things. Sawyer barely moved. He stayed in his chair by the hearth, half dozing with the rifle across his knees. She watched him in silence for hours, wondering what kind of man kept ghosts locked in trunks and blood on fabric. Wondering what he wasn't saying. "You should have listened," she thought, picturing Iris's neat handwriting, the teasing curl of her letters. "You always had to go further. Always had to run." She remembered their last morning together. Iris had stood by the train platform, with that same pale blue ribbon in her hair, eyes bright with defiance. "You worry too much," she'd laughed. "This place, this life, it's too small for me. I want to be somewhere the sky doesn't stop." Lydia had watched her disappear into that steel beast bound westward, her heart tight with unease. And now blood-stained, wool-ripped pages and silence. She waited until the hush was deep enough to feel like permission. Then she rose barefoot and padded quietly across the creaky floorboards. The handkerchief wasn't the only strange thing in the cabin. A trunk sat near the corner, half hidden beneath a spare quilt. Its latch wasn't locked. Lydia opened it slowly, careful not to rattle the hinges. Inside, a woman's dress. Green wool, faded and patched. Blood along the hem, dried to a dark rust. She stared at it, breath caught, a chill crawling under her skin. Was this Iris? Had she bled in this very room? Had she screamed here? Her fingers trembled. Beside it lay a torn book, pages ripped from the binding, ink smudged and nearly illegible. A name scratched out violently. And tucked between them, a single ribbon. Pale blue. Iris's favorite color. Lydia shut the lid softly. Her pulse thudded behind her ears. She didn't go back to sleep. By morning, the fire had died and frost had crept along the windows like veins. The wind outside screamed against the walls as if the mountain wanted in. Sawyer made coffee without a word. The kettle hissed like a warning. She waited until the steam between them was thick and bitter. "Did you know my sister?" she asked. He looked at her for a long time. Then quietly, as if surrendering to something inevitable, he said, "She came here. But she didn't belong here." "What does that mean?" She thought she could start fresh. People here don't like new starts. "So what happened to her?" His gaze didn't flinch, but his voice darkened. "There was a girl in Whisper Ridge. They blamed her for too much, for wanting too much, for making men look toes. The townie, they hurt her." Sawyer's jaw clenched. He turned his face lightly, staring out the frosted window. His hand curled around the mug, knuckles pale. The fire cracked behind them, but the silence between their words was colder. He didn't answer. Lydia stared at him. The blood-stained dress, the ribbon, the silence. Was it Iris? His eyes met hers for a second, haunted, resolute, then drifted away again. She stood the chair, scraping behind her. "Tell me the truth. Did you know her? Did you?" "I tried to help her," he said sharply. Then quieter. "That's all I'll say." She stepped closer, fists clenched. "Help her how? By hiding her things, by letting everyone think." "I did what I could," he snapped. Then, seeing her flinch, his shoulders sagged. "Sometimes that's not enough." They stood there, two storms staring each other down. Later, as she reheated some of the stew over the stove, she handed him a bowl. Their hands brushed. This time he jerked back. His voice was low, ragged. "I can't control myself around you. You need to keep your distance, Miss Hartwell." He turned and stepped out into the snow. The door slammed shut. The wind howled louder now, like it had been listening all along. Lydia stood, frozen stew bowl still warm in her hands, alone with the fire, the dress, and the ghosts that refused to rest. The morning air was brittle. Snow had piled high along the windowsills, and the wind had died, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than any storm. Lydia woke cold despite the fire. A knot of dread coiled low in her stomach. Sawyer hadn't come back. She dressed quickly, her fingers stiff, as she buttoned her coat. Something about last night lingered unresolved. The words he'd spoken, "I can't control myself around you," echoed with a rawness that disturbed her more than she cared to admit. But she couldn't let that distract her. There were still too many questions. She scanned the room again, this time, not as a guest, but as someone looking for answers. Her eyes traced the seams between floorboards, the edges of the hearth, the shadows beneath furniture. Near the table, something caught her eye. A plank slightly raised, just enough to cast a sliver of shadow. Lydia knelt, pried at the edge with her nails, then grabbed a butter knife from the drawer. The board gave way with a quiet groan. She reached in. First cloth, rough woolen. She pulled it free. Another dress, like the one from the trunk. This one darker, heavier, and seamed. The fabric along the bodice was stiff with dried blood. Her breath hitched. Beneath the dress, folded and half-rotted from moisture, lay a letter. She unfolded it slowly. The ink had run in places, but the words remained legible just enough. He said he'd sold me. He said we'd run. But I hear them outside. If I don't make it. No, I forgave him. Lydia stared at the paper as if it might scream. Her hands shook. She could almost hear Iris's voice in those words, trembling breath, and too forgiving. Iris. It had to be Iris. The ribbon. The dress. The scarf. The silence. And now this. Forgave him. Him. The letter slipped from her fingers like ash. She stumbled backward, heart pounding. Her eyes scanned the room with fresh terror. Everything that had once seemed rustic now felt sinister. The smell of smoke, The low hum of the wind through the chimney, even the warmth of the fire. Suddenly, it all felt like part of a trap. The cabin was too quiet. Then she heard its footsteps outside crunching snow. The door creaked. Sawyer entered with a fresh kill slung over one shoulder and snow on his coat. He shut the door with his boot. "You're back," Lydia said, voice hollow. He looked at her, unreadable. Storms passed. Trails might open in a day or two. Her fingers closed around the pistol she'd taken from his supplies earlier that morning. She raised it. "You lied to me," she said. "You killed her." Sawyer didn't flinch. His eyes went from the gun to her face. "I didn't." "Don't speak," she snapped, voice cracking. Tears brimmed in her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly, but the barrel stayed level. "I found her dress. I found the letter. You buried them." "You don't know what you're talking about." Lydia's breath came in shallow bursts. "She wrote that she forgave you." "What else am I supposed to think?" Sawyer's jaw tensed. He didn't move, didn't plead, just watched her like he was bracing for a storm. "I don't want to shoot you," she whispered. "But if you come any closer, I won't," he said quietly. Lydia turned, yanked the door open, and plunged into the snow. The cold hit her like a slap. Wind sliced through her coat, and snow clung to her boots in heavy clumps. But she didn't stop. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to run. The trees blurred past in a haze of white and brown. Her breath came in gasps. The pistol weighed down her pocket. Her vision swam. She didn't see the dip in the snow until it was too late. Her foot caught. She tumbled forward, arms flailing, then vanished beneath the surface with a cry. It was a snow hollow, deep, soft, packed. The cold wrapped around her like a shroud. Panic surged. She clawed at the edges, trying to pull herself free. The walls crumbled around her. "Help!" she screamed hoarsely. "Somebody, please." Nothing but silence. Then a shadow. Footsteps. A figure appeared at the edge of the hollow. Not Sawyer. A woman older, bundled in a heavy shawl, face lined with age and worry. "You're not from here," the woman said. Lydia blinked up at her. "No, I need help." The woman nodded and extended a gloved hand. Lydia grabbed hold. She was pulled to the surface, shaking and soaked through. "Come," the woman said gently. "You'll freeze out here." They walked in silence, Lydia stumbling along beside her. "My name's Mrs. Goodwin," the woman said after a while. "I live at the edge of the old trail. You're the girl asking about Iris, aren't you?" Lydia stopped walking. "You knew her." Mrs. Goodwin gave a tight nod. "You shouldn't be alone out here. Come, I'll show you back." Lydia hesitated, glancing behind her toward the trees, the cabin hidden deep in the hills. "Do you think he killed her?" she asked. Mrs. Goodwin looked at her with something unreadable in her gaze. "What I think is that this place holds too many secrets." She paused, then added softly, "You're not the first girl who came looking. Some don't make it back." Lydia said nothing and followed her into the falling snow. Sawyer stood alone in the clearing snow, dusting his shoulders, rifle hanging loose by his side. She was gone. He'd known it the moment he stepped into the cabin and saw the floorboard left ajar. He didn't need to see the letter again. He remembered every word of it. "If I don't make it, no, I forgave him." The guilt never left. It just slept for a while, buried beneath work and silence. But now it had teeth again. And it was gnawing. The night before, he'd watched Lydia toss and turn in sleep, murmuring something he couldn't quite catch. One word cut through clearly: Iris. She'd reached for something in the dark eyes flickering beneath shut lids. Then a single whisper: "The fire, it's coming." He hadn't dared wake her. Now he turned toward the trail. Her boot prints were still fresh, scattered in panic, a jagged line leading into the woods. He didn't follow. Not yet. Not while his hands were still shaking. Instead, he looked toward the valley. toward the town that used to call itself Whisper Ridge. The church had burned 3 winters ago. People still said it was an accident. Chimney ash dry, wood old sins finally catching fire. But Sawyer knew the truth. He'd seen the torches, heard the hymns twisted into threats, watched the men pretend they were righteous while doing something evil. Iris had come to Whisper Ridge looking for sanctuary. She found a sermon written in smoke, and he hadn't stopped them. The wood creaked under his boots as he stepped into what was left of the chapel. Charred pews, collapsed rafters. Snow had drifted in through broken windows, blanketing the ruin in white. But some things still clung to the bones of the place. The altar was scorched black, but the stone hearth behind it still held shape. Someone had built a fire there recently. He knelt and touched the ash warm. She'd been here. He stood slowly and moved to the far wall, where the cabinet used to hold hymnals and Bibles. Most were gone or ruined, but one remained tucked behind the beam. He pulled it free. A thin, scorched Bible. Inside the cover, written in delicate script, Iris Hartwell. His breath caught. Not from surprise, from memory. He'd given it to her. They'd met in the cold, too. She'd wandered into town asking questions no one wanted to hear, her Boston accent too sharp, her skirts too bright for this forgotten stretch of wilderness. But she smiled at everyone, and for a little while it had worked. Until the preacher's son noticed her. And his wife did too. After that, it hadn't mattered how many kind things Iris did or how polite she was or how she bowed her head in church. They'd already decided, she's a temptress, they said. She brings shame. Sawyer had tried to shield her quietly. Told her to leave. She refused. I'm not afraid of firebrands, she'd said. She should have been. The wind shifted. He looked up and saw Lydia standing in the doorway, her cheeks red from cold, eyes darker than before. You followed me, he said. She didn't speak. He held up the Bible. Let her see the name. I didn't kill her, he said quietly. But I let them think I did. That was the only way to see for her. Lydia stepped forward, snow crackling beneath her boots. Her voice was brittle. You let them think you were a murderer. I told them she was dead. Buried a dress. Stained it myself. Made them believe she ran off after I snapped. You staged it. I hid her in the South Woods. Sent her away with a trader heading for New Mexico. Bought her time. Bought her silence. Lydia stared at the Bible. So she lived, he nodded. For a while she wrote. Then she stopped. I figured she had her reasons. Lydia's shoulders sagged, but her eyes never left his. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Because I knew what it would look like. And because if you'd left before you found that letter, you wouldn't have stayed long enough to understand. Silence stretched between them, thick with smoke and memory. Lydia turned slowly, looking around the burned church. The wind slipped through the open windows, stirring ash like old ghosts. She loved churches, Lydia murmured. Not for God, for the light through stained glass. Sawyer nodded, his throat tight. She used to sit right there. Said the way the colors hit the floor made it feel like magic. Lydia looked back at him. And you let them do this to her. He didn't defend himself, just looked down at the book in his hands. I couldn't stop them, he said. But I could make sure they didn't find her body. Because there wasn't one. She didn't move. But she didn't walk away either. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But belief was dangerous here. The fire behind the hearth hissed softly, embers glowing red under the ash. And for the first time in years, Sawyer James felt warm. The morning after the church, Lydia sat alone on a stump just beyond the tree line, fingers curled tight around the edges of her coat. The wind had settled, but the cold hadn't. Snow clung to her boots and lashes, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were louder than the weather. She wanted to scream. Everything inside her was knotted, shame, doubt, disbelief. Iris was alive or had been. Sawyer hadn't lied, not really. He'd hidden the truth, wrapped it in silence and sacrifice. But still, he let her believe he was a murderer. She didn't know whether to hit him or hold him. Miss Hartwell, the voice broke through the hush like a branch snapping. Lydia turned to see Mrs. Goodwin approaching from the slope. The old woman moved slow but steady, wrapped in a thick brown shawl, her gloved hands clutching a small parcel. "I hoped I'd find you alone," Mrs. Goodwin said. Lydia rose slowly, brushing frost from her skirt. "What is it, Mrs.?" Goodwin looked at her carefully, then extended the parcel. "Something your sister left. She asked me to give it to you if you ever came here." Lydia's breath caught. She took the bundle with numb fingers and opened it with care. Inside, a single folded letter, yellowed at the edges. The envelope read in Iris's unmistakable hand, "For Lydia, if she ever comes." Her throat closed. She stepped back, sat again, and unfolded the letter with trembling hands. "Dearest Lydia, if you're reading this, it means you came looking for me. And it means I didn't have the chance to say goodbye properly. I'm sorry. Sawyer didn't kill me. He saved me. In a way I never understood until much later. The night they came for me, he wrapped me in one of his coats, gave me his horse, and told me to ride south with the trader camped by the ridge. Then he burned my dress and buried it in the snow. He told the town I was dead. Let them hate him, so they'd stop looking for me. I made it to Santa Fe. I married a man there. He's not kind. He doesn't let me send letters. I've tried, but if you're holding this, know that I lived. And that Sawyer gave me that life. He gave up everything to protect me. Do you remember that summer we camped behind the garden and promised we'd always stay close? I broke that promise. And I'm so sorry. Please don't hate him. Not like I did at first. I miss you every day. Iris." Lydia stared at the page as tears blurred the ink. Her shoulders began to shake. A sob tore from her throat. She could see Iris's hair blowing in the Boston wind, that impossible grin as she leapt from the train steps. The smell of cinnamon from her scarf. Her voice saying, "Don't worry, Lyd. I'll write again soon." Mrs. Goodwin said nothing, just stood beside her in the snow, a quiet sentinel. "I thought he—" Lydia couldn't finish. "I know," the woman said softly. "We all did. He let us." Lydia nodded slowly, wiping her face with her sleeve. "I have to go," she whispered. "I have to see him." She ran. The snow was deeper now, but her steps were certain. The trees blurred as she passed the cold forgotten. Her heart was pounding with every word of Iris's letter, every image of Sawyer's face when she pointed the gun at him. She burst through the tree line, the cabin coming into view. The door was open. Inside, the place was almost bare. His pack was near the cot bedroll tied. The fire had burned low. Sawyer stood near the hearth adjusting the strap on his rifle. He turned as she entered, and for a moment, his face was unreadable. Then the corners of his mouth dipped. He looked like a man bracing for another wound. "I was about to leave," he said. "I know." Her voice cracked. He looked away. "Didn't figure there was much point in staying. Not after what you saw." Lydia stepped forward, holding the letter like a lifeline. I read it. Iris's letter. He didn't move. She said you saved her, that you gave up everything. Still, he didn't speak. His jaw worked once, then stilled. "She's alive," Lydia whispered, voice breaking. "Or, she was. She made it. Because of you." Sawyer's eyes lifted. Slowly, Lydia crossed the room, her boots silent against the old wood floor. She stood in front of him now, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the lines in his brow. "I pointed a gun at you," she said. "I thought the worst. I saw the blood, the letter, and I let fear decide for me. He met her eyes finally. You were right to question it. I would have done the same. She shook her head. I don't want to be right. I want to understand. Violence had stretched between them again. Then gently Lydia held out the letter. He took it with careful hands. Read the opening line, then stopped. His breath shook. He lowered himself onto the edge of the cot, eyes still on the page. His fingers trembled as he traced her name. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lydia whispered, Don't go. Sawyer looked at her. Not with surprise, but with something older, wearier. Like he'd waited a long time for someone to ask. I was never planning on staying, he said. But you didn't leave yet. No. She stepped closer, voice soft. Then stay now. He said nothing. But he didn't move away either. And in that silence, something settled between them. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the beginning of it. Sawyer had never been good with words. Some men carved meaning out of speeches, turned sentences into shields or swords. Sawyer James kept his words few, and his heart locked behind silence. But when Lydia Hartwell looked at him across the dim cabin light, her coat still flecked with frost, and her cheeks flushed from running, he knew silence wouldn't be enough anymore. You let me hate you, she said, voice quiet but sharp, just to keep her safe. Her eyes searched his, like she was looking for something lost. He didn't flinch. What mattered was that she lived, he said. You can hate me forever, and I'd still do it again. Lydia blinked, and for a moment, the fire in her faded. You'd carry that burden alone. He let out a dry breath. I already did. She looked like she might say more, but then something shifted in her expression. She stepped back, her posture suddenly tight. What is it? He asked. She didn't answer, just glanced past him toward the window. Sawyer moved fast, drawing the rifle from where it leaned by the door. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate crunching in the snow. He stepped outside first, Lydia just behind him. The snow was falling again, thin whispering flakes drifting from a slate-colored ski sleigh. A figure approached down the ridge trail, coat, long hat, pulled low. Too slow to be passing through. Too steady to be afraid. Sawyer lifted the rifle. That's far enough. The figure stopped maybe 10 paces away. Wind peeled at his coat. You, James, the man called. I am. I heard your guest's been stirring old dust. Lydia stepped forward. If you have something to say it to me. The man chuckled low and sour. You ain't from here. You don't know what this place remembers. Sawyer shifted the rifle slightly. And you don't get to decide who gets to forget. You protecting her now. Sawyer didn't answer. He just stepped in front of Lydia. The man's hand twitched. Too fast. The rifle cracked. Sawyer hissed and dropped to one knee. Damn it. Lydia knelt beside him, her hands already pressing against his side. Blood seeped through the thick coat. I got him, she shouted, eyes wide. But when she looked up, the stranger was already gone. Just shadows and snowfall in his place. Back inside, Sawyer lay back against the wall, breath shallow, but eyes alert. It's a graze, Lydia said, voice shaking. You're lucky. He gave a half smile. Could say that about a few things lately. She laughed, but it broke halfway, catching in her throat. She pressed her forehead against his chest. Don't ever do that again, she whispered. His hand, rough and warm, came up to rest on her back. Just lightly, like a man not used to being allowed to touch. The fire crackled. Outside, the snow fell harder, muting the world. Minutes passed uncounted. Then Lydia shifted to look at him. You really would have let me hate you forever if it meant you got to go home safe. Yeah. She stared at him, something breaking open behind her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Sawyer swallowed. You sure? I'm sure. They didn't kiss. There was no need. She just rested her head against his shoulder and he leaned into her like someone remembering what warmth felt like. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, something had finally settled. They hadn't said love, but they had chosen to stay. Spring came late in the mountains. Even in April, the snow clung to the northern shadows tucked against the roots of pines and buried deep in the folds of the hills. But here and there green pushed through, shoots of life in a land still recovering from frost. They worked in silence, but it was a comfortable kind. Sawyer stood on the ladder, hammer in hand, fixing the roof plank by plank. Lydia passed up nails boards and, when needed, her thoughts. "I think I understand now," she said once, shielding her eyes from the glare. He looked down. "Understand what? Why you chose to stay hidden here. These mountains, they are brutal, but they are honest." Sawyer nodded, turned back to the roof. "They don't lie. People do." Below, the rebuilt corral held 2 horses, hers finally healthy again, his growing older, but still loyal. A dog had started hanging around the cabin, not quite tame, not quite wild. Lydia named him Ashes. Inside, the fire burned low and steady, no longer a thing of survival, but of comfort. That afternoon, Lydia sat at the old table with a sheet of paper, ink staining her fingers. The window was open to let in the scent of pine and melting snow. She wrote slowly, "Dear Cyrus, I found him. And I found more than that. You don't need to worry. I won't tell anyone where you are. Your secret is yours to keep. Just like this place is ours now. I wish you could see it. The way the light hits the ridge at sunrises. The quiet. The sky that feels too wide to belong to anyone. He's different than I imagined. Not softer, but real. And I see why you trusted him. I hope wherever you are, you've found peace. I think I'm starting to. Your sister always, Lydia." She folded the letter, placed it in a wooden box, and slid it beneath a loose plank under the bed. A secret kept safe by timber and dust. That evening, Sawyer came in with something wrapped in canvas. He placed it on the table, then sat across from her, unusually quiet. Lydia raised an eyebrow. "You look like a man about to confess something." He gave a short laugh, rubbed the back of his neck. "Not a confession. More like acknowledgement." She unwrapped the canvas. Inside was a small wooden box, carved smooth and stained dark. On the lid, burned into the grain, were the words, "To the one who sees me and stays." Lydia traced the words with her fingertips. Her voice was soft. "You made this." He nodded. "A while ago. Didn't know who it was for. Now I do." She opened it. Inside was a single photograph, faded and creased. A younger Sawyer standing beside a cabin, half-built, snow at his boots. And beside it a scrap of cloth, pale blue, torn from a dress that once belonged to a girl the town tried to forget. Lydia looked up. "Thank you. For not running." He met her gaze. "Thank you for coming back." She pressed the box to her chest for a moment, before setting it gently on the table. Outside, the snow began again, soft and slow. No threat in it now. They stood together at the door, watching it fall. Not speaking, not needing to. Next week, they'd start digging the garden bed. Come summer, maybe even plant carrots. The wind carried no ghosts, just the hush of a land remembering and forgiving. Lydia leaned into Sawyer's shoulder. He rested his hand over hers. And somewhere between the rise and fall of breath, between silence and heartbeat, a whisper passed like wind through trees. The mountains don't forget, but they forgive. When the storm passed, Lydia didn't find answers in the snow. She found something harder to hold: forgiveness. And here, he didn't need to be saved. He just needed to be seen. This wasn't a love story wrapped in fireworks. It was quiet, hard-earned. A story of 2 people choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. Sometimes the strongest kind of love isn't spoken. It's built plank by plank, morning by morning, under a sky that remembers everything, but chooses to forgive.